Welcome to the Knowledge Sector Indonesia podcast series. You can watch and listen our podcast at www.ksi-indonesia.org. We are here today with Louise Shaxson, a research fellow at the Research and Policy and Development Programme of the Overseas Development Institute in London. Louise has been involved during her career in processes that aimed at strengthening the use of evidence in government agencies and ministries, and has just published a working paper for the Knowledge Sector Initiative that describes one of these experiences at the Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs in the United Kingdom.
Well, I've spent the past 15 years working to improve the use of evidence in public policy, both in the UK and other countries. And in the UK, I spent 4 years working inside a government department to help them understand how to implement an evidence-based approach. And this was DEFRA, the Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs. Now, there's an increasing emphasis on doing this thing called evidence-based policymaking, but there's actually no guidance out there as to how to do it. And there are very few government departments I've seen that have taken such a purposeful approach to this. They've been working on it for 10 years, and I think there are a lot of lessons that can be shared. Well, there are a lot of definitions, but the one that I use is that it's a process of informing political decisions about how to deliver better outcomes for citizens using the best available knowledge to deliver cost-effective solutions. And what many people forget is that it's not just about the quality of the evidence. It's equally important that the processes within a department that use evidence are as robust as possible. You can have the best evidence in the world, but if you put it through poor processes, you won't get good evidence-based policymaking. Over the past 10 years, DEFRA has implemented a very strategic approach to how it develops and manages its evidence base, so that it does 3 things. The first is that it really paid attention to what evidence it does need and what evidence it doesn't really need to help it achieve its policy priorities. The second thing it did was to deliver value for money it invests in evidence. And the third thing it did was to embed the approach in its normal business practices. So what all of this means is that the way it allocates its financial resources and its human resources, they're absolutely focused on helping it to achieve its policy outcomes in the most cost-effective way possible. So its evidence base is now much more multidisciplinary, and it has much closer working relationships with organisations that provide evidence, such as other government departments, civil society organisations and universities. As I said earlier, there was no guidance at all about how to do this, so they've worked it out for themselves based on a few simple principles. Now, they've done it in 3 phases. The first phase focused on making sure that the whole organisation understood how important it was to be evidence-based. The second phase focused on making an evidence-based approach just part of business as usual. And the third phase, which only started in 2014, what that's doing is developing a strategy that covers the whole of the DEFRA network, not just the central ministry. In the first phase, they developed a map of the evidence base for the whole department, and this helped them identify where the gaps in the evidence were, and also quite a few instances where people were actually collecting the same evidence without realizing it. Then what they did was they developed clear statements of the evidence that they would need over the next 5 years, and they sent those out for public consultation. Now, this was the first time any government department in the UK had put its entire evidence base out for consultation. I think it was a very brave move, but it really paid off. In the second phase, they linked the evidence they needed to the business planning process. So now what there's a clear line of sight between the policy priorities, the key outcomes that need to be achieved, the policy activities that need to be undertaken to achieve those outcomes, and the evidence activities that are needed to inform the policy activities. They also experimented with different ways of linking the people who specialised in producing evidence with the policy teams to ensure that the evidence was of the highest possible quality and that the policy teams really understood what it meant. After phase 1 and phase 2, they understood what evidence-based policymaking means and how to manage it within the core department. Now what they're trying to do is to work with other organisations in a similarly strategic way. It's only early days, but they have a very ambitious agenda to really deliver value for all public money that's being spent on environmental evidence. Well, I think the first is that it is possible for a ministry to take a very strategic approach to developing and managing its evidence base. The key things are that the process needs to be led from the top, and senior management needs to commit to a long-term change process because it won't happen overnight. The other thing is you need to take a series of small steps rather than one big one, and that way you can adapt to changing circumstances. And it means that you can also improve your coordination with external organisations as you go along. And I think the final thing is that the process does need to be as transparent as possible. But if you can do all of this, you can ensure that the way evidence is managed and the way staff resources are allocated help you to deliver your outcomes more cost effectively. And you can have a lot more confidence that your policies are much more evidence-based.